Hey there guys, it's Jesse, and today I'm rolling out my new and complete dungeon and boss strategy guide for 4.1 Zul Gurub. While this is the most recent PTR version as of last night, things can still change, and anything that changes will be noted with annotations in the future and links to where you can see the changes. First off, before we start, as always, this guide is not only meant to help you, but also show that if I, a mediocre gamer at best, can do it, then you can too. With that in mind, I am slightly more mediocre than usual, as I was forced to make a pre-made character, so all my gear is in heroic blues, which I would assume is slightly less than the average player in live right now. Our tank is in the exact same boat. However, for the sake of openness, most of our DPS are in purples and from my guild. I'll say it now, and you'll understand it later. This place makes me weep for pugs. The layout of Zul Gurub is essentially the same. The only thing that changed is what fills that layout. You saw right away when we first got in here that there was sort of a mini-boss, and you can see that behind her, there is this poisonous cloud-filled area. This kind of thing is sort of the new standard in Zul Gurub. You fight a mini-boss, then maybe have to get over some type of obstacle, and then fight another mini-boss, and then a bigger and stronger boss. There are very few packs of mobs in this instance that are not related to some sort of mini-event or bigger boss dynamic. Now, as you can see here, one of my quests is to go and kill several of those mini-bosses. For clarity's sake, there's not only quest givers back there, but there's also a vendor and a repair guy. Now, as you can see here, I've collected 3 quests that have me go around and kill the mini-bosses in this zone. There are several different types, from the voodoo mask bosses who shoot lasers or twirl bones, to the void creature who sends legions of worshipping trolls at you, to a giant turtle who hides in the waters of the river. Big note on that, by the way. The fish have been upgraded with this massive damage increase, so swimming around right now is not really an option. As for the traps, as with this one right here, it doesn't really take a genius to figure out that green gas is bad, and the cauldron in some way helps you alleviate this problem. In fact, there are 3 types of cauldrons littered throughout the instance. Green, as you now know, or most likely knew before, gives you a buff against poison. Red gives you a fire AoE that works much like a Warlock's Hellfire spell, and blue gives you the power to deal massive damage to a single target and freeze them as well. Sadly, the buffs only last for a few seconds, and as of last night, they cannot be used on any major bosses. But it still works very well for dealing with the various traps and mobs that stand in your way. Speaking of traps, this boss pack pool is one of the hardest in the instance. The mini-boss has a protective aura that covers the casters, who are all casting at the same time when you engage. The goal is to kill the mini-boss and as many of the mobs as you can before the cast gets off. It does a ton of damage and can wipe raids really fast. Anyway, enough with the chat about the dungeon itself. Let's talk boss strategy for the main bosses. How can you tell who's who? The mini-bosses will be level 86, the big guys will be level 87. The first boss, High Priest Venoxus, has one of the most overly elaborate looking battles in the instance, but once you see through the light show, you'll realize it's actually pretty simple. At the start of the fight, the statues will lay down a maze-like pattern of poison. From what I could tell, there was only one pattern, but I am not sure on that, so don't quote me on it. While the maze pattern is forming, the boss will cast Toxic Link on 2 of the players, causing them to link and take damage. The only way you can get rid of this is by getting further away from that person and breaking the link. So stand spread apart at the start of the battle to make the ability do the least damage possible. During this time, he'll also use Whispers of Hethys, which shoots poison bolts at a player. Eventually, I think it's 70%, he turns into a snake and now has increased damage, leaving pools of poison beneath him and casting the Breath of Hethys, which is a frontal cone poison attack. It does a lot of damage, so you really need to heal through it. After a while, when the maze is complete, he'll climb back up to the top of the stairs where he started, causing the pools of venom to explode. You definitely want to be out of those. Then he'll cast Blood Venom, where 3 streams of poison track players around, who not only must avoid it, but while doing so in the confines of the maze. Once he returns from the stairs, he has this momentary downtime where you can use that to put a huge dent in his HP. After that, it's just rinse and repeat. Really not that hard of a fight. And as you can see, even Balthazar in his very first attempt got the achievement. So it's safe to say this is one of the easier ones. The next boss, the Bloodlord, who up until the most recent hotfix you could use the nearby ice cauldron to help kill, no longer works like that. So we had to come up with a new, more solid strategy to get him down. The Bloodlord, much like his previous reincarnation, still rides the raptor, now in skeleton form, and still is surrounded by spirits. Like many fights in this instance, it directly echoes the previous version of it. This time around, rather than possibly maybe sorta dying on the boss and having one of the ghosts resurrect you, the boss will randomly target someone and instantly kill them, leveling himself up just like the old raid. However, this time when the ghosts come to resurrect you, you receive a buff that increases your health, damage, and healing by 25% and reduces the damage you take by 10%. Of course, when the boss sees that the ghosts are helping you, he dismounts from his raptor and sicks it on the ghost. This part right here is the most important, because you have a finite number of ghosts, and since they vanish after they res you, eventually you're gonna run out. And to make matters worse, you now have a skeleton raptor running around actively trying to kill them. So you need to make killing the raptor a priority. Once it's down, turn your attention back to the boss. He will eventually resummon the raptor, so again, kill it quick. As I'm sure you've noticed by now, the other major ability he has is Devastating Slam, that causes the ground to explode. However, I will say this. As you have witnessed, it is very easy to see, and it should be easily avoided. The next fight is in the former Edge of Madness, now called the Cache of Madness. Many artifacts are stored here, and by having high enough archaeology, you can unlock this optional boss. Once you've found the correct artifacts, they'll swirl around the room and summon one of 4 random bosses. In our case, we got Wushale, which I assume means the other 3 bosses from the previous version are options as well. But for this boss, the fight isn't really that hard. The first thing you have to watch out for is the Lightning Rush, which causes him to charge a player. You need to move out of that right away, because once he stops, he casts a lightning rod, which does massive AoE damage and will most likely kill you unless you're a tank. He also comes with thunderstorms and lightning bolts as well, but to put it simply, just stay spread out, be ready to move, and other than that, this fight is pretty freaking simple.
Well, now Mojo has a good example of what happens when you stand and stuff.
So right about now, I am almost certain that a large majority of you are like, "Oh, this looks too easy." Well, get ready to complain that it's too hard. The next boss, the Panther, is one of the hardest fights in this dungeon, if not all of Cata so far. And the way it works is much like the very first Panther boss of the old raid. She spends the first half of the fight in solo tank and spank form, and then the last 50%, she calls her sleeping Panthers to help her. Pretty straightforward fight, yeah? Well, did I mention the Panthers now have a stacking bleed effect per swing that does 10k damage, multiply that by 16 Panthers in the room, and the amount of attacks they get off on the tank or any other players who get aggro, plus the boss's additional damage, well, it's just a sad sight. Now, we did try to push through the damage in Phase 2, but then we remembered we have a tank and healer who are only in blues, so we had to formulate a different approach. In the end, we decided to pull 4 Panthers at a time, taking Phase 1 as slow as possible, being sure not to damage her to 50% too fast. The idea is that once we hit Phase 2, there are no Panthers left to summon, so she should be an easy kill. Now, we did actually try to do it 1 at a time and then 2 at a time, but it just took too long and we ran out of mana every single time, and when we got to Phase 2, she just stomped us. The only time we ever stood a chance was pulling 4 at a time, so we went with it. So not only are you facing 4 incredibly powerful Panthers in Phase 1, but you also have a boss that casts Shadow Bolts, has this ability called Wave of Agony, which shoots a wave of blood at you, knocking you back if you're in the way, and has this ability called Tears of Blood, which does an area damage effect on the ground around the boss. Luckily, this is interruptible. Though I will say I'm not sure if it's a complete area effect or if it's just little spots around the ground. I really didn't get a chance to see it that much, but with that said, it's better just to interrupt and not have to worry about it. Finally, when she reaches 50%, the roof collapses, causing damage to everyone, and she turns into a Panther. Just like the previous boss. She's going to stealth around and attack from time to time. Luckily, by herself, she really doesn't do a lot of damage, and you should have her down in no time. The second to last fight is now considerably easier in comparison to the previous, and is really nothing more than a test to see if you were paying attention. Zanzul has taken over the zombified portion of Zul Gurub, and this fight is basically a summon-based battle. His only real attack is something called Zanzul Fire, which shoots a line of fire in the direction of a target, and everyone just needs to get out of the way. Other than that, like most of the other bosses in here, he has Shadow Bolt. But that's it. The main tactic of this fight revolves around the 3 types of cauldrons I mentioned way back at the beginning. Much like Maloriak, he has 3 phases: fire, ice, and poison. Except in this case, you drink from the cauldron, not the boss. For example, if you summon zombies, you run to the red cauldron, which would allow you to AoE them all down. I personally recommend the healer avoid this to mitigate damage and keep the aggro low, but if you want to do it, go for it. If he summons a giant berserker, you would choose ice, as it would freeze and almost one-shot him. And of course, if Zanzul turns the ground green, you guessed it, get to that poison cauldron. Other than living through those attacks, this fight is quite simple and not really that much of an issue, especially when compared with the last one. And now, at last, we come to the final boss, Jindo the God Breaker. Jindo's fight is split into 2 phases. The first is considerably easier than the second, but only because the second involves so much maneuvering around and getting things just right that, you know what, it's probably just better to tell you when we get there. For now, let's talk about phase 1. When you engage Jindo, he'll cast a green shield called Dead Zone over wherever he's standing. This ability reduces magic damage by 85% and reduces magic damage dealt by 10%. While this shield is up, he'll cast Shadow of Hakar, which is this chain attack that, as far as anyone could tell, hit everyone in the room and did a ton of damage, but we may not have been spread out far enough, so I do not know if that's accurate. So our strategy was to keep Jindo and the tank in the shield, and everyone else stay out. Right before he casts the Shadow of Hakar, everyone runs back in. The chain attack will go off 3 times, no one takes any damage. Once you see or hear the 3rd chain go, you back out and once again begin to do damage. I'm almost positive this is not the most efficient strategy, but for us it worked and got us to phase 2. When you enter phase 2, things get a little hectic as you enter the spirit world. And crazily, you now fight to free Hakar. He has 3 chains that hold him to the ground, and they are all protected by a shield which is impenetrable, and the chains themselves have over 1,000,000 health. So how do you break them? Much like the original Hakar fight, you have to lure guys from the bottom up and have them enter combat. So you need to have someone go down and lure a Gurubashi spirit up onto the platform. These guys have a jump that smashes the ground, and of course will break the shield, allowing you access to the chain. To do this, everyone needs to be near one of the shields, as the Gurubashi spirit will select a target and jump at it. If you aren't nearby one of the shields, you're going to waste your jump. And as far as we could tell, the spirits might have 2 or 1, or sometimes 60 seconds went by and they hadn't jumped at all, so you cannot risk wasting an attack. But of course, to complicate things more, you can't stand still either. Not only are there Twisted Spirit ads spawning to kill you, but Jindo now has Shadow Blasts that are quite similar to the slowed Fireball from the Halfist Drake in the Bastion of Twilight, except for these hit for over 75% of your life. The problem is, the more you move around, the less likely you are to hit one of the chains when the guy jumps. So you need to watch where you're going and move around that shield on the chain. If the Shadow Blast is coming to one side, scooch over to the other. It's that simple. Just do not leave that shield chain area. If you do need to move, watch yourself to see if you have an arrow above your head. That means the guy's coming for you. Get back to that shield ASAP. And please remember here, the chains are 3rd on the priority list. Make sure you keep everyone alive first, and keep those spirits coming. If you get a shield down on a chain, don't get all excited and run to destroy it. Clear the ads first. Finally, once all 3 chains are down, Hakar will be free and Jindo will get what's coming to him. And that is Zul Gurub. I hope you enjoyed. thumbs up, subscribe, and as always, to be continued.